Good afternoon, everyone. Is this on? Welcome to yet another meeting of the Housing and Homelessness Committee. Very exciting. Today is Wednesday, August 16th. We are meeting at our new time today, 2:30 rather than 2, since we're following a rescheduled transportation committee, which I will always be running down from. And today we actually have two meetings, one regular meeting and a special joint meeting with the Government Operations Committee. And today I am so far joined by my colleagues, Councilmember Blumenfield, Councilmember Lee, and Councilmember Rodriguez. Mr. Verano, can you please call the roll?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Rahman.
Here.
Councilmember Blumenfield.
Present.
Councilmember Harris-Dawson. Councilmember Harris-Dawson is absent. Councilmember Rodriguez.
Here.
Councilmember Lee.
Present.
4 members and a quorum, Madam Chair.
Great. Today we have 8 items to consider on the regular agenda. Let's get through that agenda hopefully as quickly as possible. Item 1 is a reappointment of Wendy Gruhl to the LAHSA Commission, and she's here. Item 2 is the reappointment of Tanisha Saunders to the LAHSA Commission. Item 3 is a report from the Mayor's Office regarding how funds that the city may receive because of the opioid and tobacco settlements could be spent. The report covers the proposed design, implementation, let's see what else, and evaluation of the pilot substance use disorder treatment program for folks in interim housing. And item 4 is a CLA report that gives an overview of homelessness prevention programs. This is a multi-part discussion that we've been having. Today's the last day, and we can forward the final recommendations to the full council. Item 5 is a CAO report regarding the HAP4 grant application from the state. Item 6 is a report from the Department of City Planning that some of you may have heard already, but I haven't, regarding the 2022 annual progress reports on the implementation of the general plan and the housing element. And item 7 is a motion regarding temporary homeless housing on the parcel located at 217 West 1st Street in CD14 and placing utilities for future park usage. And I understand there's an amendment for this item, and if someone from the CAO could read that amendment now, that would be helpful.
Good afternoon, everyone. Annabelle Gonzalez from the CAO's office. It is requested that the Housing and Homeless Committee amend the recommendations of the Council File 23-0737 dated June 28, 2023 as follows. Delete Recommendation 4 and amend the following recommendations to read as follows. Recommendation 1, I therefore move that the Bureau of Engineering be instructed to coordinate design and technical reviews of the state's design proposals in collaboration with other city departments for the temporary homeless housing project located at 217 West 1st Street, APN 516-100-5925. And recommendation 2, I further move that BOE be instructed to review and collaborate with the state's analysis of the site suitability as measured by factors including but not limited to resident safety and quality of life, staff safety, and access to on-site services of various types of temporary housing in the design proposal.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And the final item is item 8, which is a verbal update from the CAO and the city attorney regarding the Alliance settlement, the settlement agreement between the city and the LA Alliance and the city's progress towards meeting its obligations pertaining to any agreements made under this settlement, which we have been talking about in previous meetings. And for item 3, I understand, Mr. Blumenfield, you have some amendments as well. Would you like to read those into the record now?
For 3? You mean for 4?
Item 3.
I have some amendments for 4, which I'm happy to read in the record.
Item 3 or item 4, sorry.
What's that?
For the prevention programs?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. Yes, let's read those. Yeah, I have one as well for that.
Okay, I mean, they're
Yeah.
pretty minor. Under 2, to add in NCIFD, so it says instruct the LAHD and CIFD to report on a strategic plan, etc.
Okay.
In instruction 4, it currently reads instruct youth, YDD, EWDD, and request LAHSA, and I'm adding in and LAUSD.
Oh, great.
To report on strategies to better incorporate youth outreach into their existing programs, and then insert and report back on system improvement efforts for the transition age youth TAY CES. and then adding instruction 12 to request LASA to report back on problem-solving programs and other types of homelessness prevention and intervention efforts utilized at LASA's Access and Family Solutions Centers.
Perfect. Okay. And we will discuss that item, so we'll hold that. And then I have an amendment for that item as well, which is the homelessness prevention work. The final amendment would be to instruct the CLA to report back with recommendations for identifying a city department or working group that will assume responsibility for overseeing the implementation of the report's recommendations and determining a schedule on which this working group will meet and report back to this committee regarding progress on that implementation. That's it. Okay, so with that, let's move on to public comment. And I just want to confirm that we have an interpreter available today.
That is correct, Madam Chair.
Great. And Mr. Leung, do you want to provide some instructions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. To members of the public who would like to provide public comment, when it is your turn to speak, please state your name and which of the agenda items you would like to speak on. You have 1 minute to speak on one agenda item or 2 minutes to speak on 2 or more items. In addition, those who would like to address the committee with general public comment will be provided 1 additional minute for a maximum up to 3 minutes per person for all agenda items, including general public comment. We will inform you when your time is up. When speaking on the agenda items, please be on topic. Our goal is to get through as many speakers as we can. If you are not speaking on topic, or if we cannot tell whether you're speaking on an agenda item, we will give you 1 brief warning. If you continue to be off topic, you will forfeit the rest of your time, and we will move on to the next speaker.
Okay, great. So we'll start with public comment. We'll start with Mr. Greenspan, followed by Ms. Kennedy and Mr. Herman.
Mike Greenspan, Bruin Butt Kicking Florida Gator. Yes, I'm going to be speaking on all items in general public comment.
You have 2 minutes and 1 minute, so go ahead, sir.
The first thing, to the victor goes the spoils on number 1, the reappointment of Wendy Gruhl to the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority Commission. Now, I wanted to go into a little bit of detail. Usually, I have no problem with appointees as long as they aren't some of previous appointees of previous mayors, like somebody who had kiddie porn, but that would not be Wendy Gruhl, thank God. However, she did give money to a guy named Mitchell Englander. Remember Englander? He was one of your colleagues. He was council president pro tem, and John Lee was his chief deputy. Bribe money from developers while on the Plum Committee. He got money from developers, bribe money. He got hotel rooms bribes in Las Vegas, liquor bill bribes, pussy bribes, you name it. He hasn't seen a bribe he didn't like. Wendy Gruhl gave money to his campaign when he ran for supervisor. And her successor, Ron Galperin, gave money to the campaign too. How despicable. Now, John Lee was there on that trip in Las Vegas, but obviously he wasn't a big fish to fry. But I do want people should know, and I do believe in total government sunshine, being from Florida. I mean, we say queer, but we don't say that other word. But we do believe in open government, and people should know these things. And if somebody's given to somebody unsavory, somebody who should not have ever been in office, then we should let it be known. Your conduct does matter. Now, on the other appointment, well, I guess I don't know the person and have no problems with the other one, but I really had a big problem with an Englander contributor being appointed and now reappointed by a different mayor. Now, let's go into general public comment.
Sorry, can I just ask, sir, for just a brief pause? We were just informed that the audio for the YouTube link is not working for the meeting.
All right, I'll look into it, Madam Chair.
Okay,
1 moment,
thank
please.
you.
Do I go back again to speak?
You have a minute.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, we have somebody here in this room who was with Englander at the time we ended up paying a $75,000 settlement on. And who is that person? John Lee. And how have we rewarded him? We have put him on the Association of Independent Cities Board of Directors. I mean, he was chief deputy when it cost us $75,000 to settle a claim. Obviously, there was a gal in the office, and all the dicks in the office decided, well, she'd be a good source of some action. And yes, she put out for her lawyer boyfriend, and guess what? We put out $75,000 to settle a sexual harassment complaint. Well, what's the solution to all this? Well, let me show you. Remove John Lee from the Association of Independent Cities Board of Directors. That's the solution.
Thank you. Next speaker. Ms. Kennedy, and we'll have one more speaker, Mr. Smith.
Hi, General Peggy Lee Kennedy, general public comment, and I guess 5 and 8.
You have 2 minutes for your items, 1 minute for general public comment.
The CAO is responsible for creating a lot of the homeless, whatever program forms, and I don't know if you've seen this, but it's a CAO document called the Vehicle Dwelling Oversized Vehicle Ordinance Outreach Form. It's 3 pages, and it really documents all the bad things and, you know, who's there and everything. And it says service referrals. So, you know, that means like a piece of paper that says call 211 or a list of numbers that you could call, or who knows what it is. It's a referral. It is not a service. So really this whole thing around the explosion of RVs in our communities, we're not dealing with it in a humane way. We need to identify people's needs and what we can do to help them. And the CAO is just saying refer them to services. And even in the CAO's own programs, they're supposed to do outreach and services, not give them a referral. So I just want to bring that to your attention. And also I would like to know when we are going to put lived experience people on the task force. When are we? CAO, City Council, Homeless Committee, when are we going to have some lived experience people addressing these issues, like on the mayor's new task force to go tow and harass and torture RV people and not house them because, you know, there's no housing and it's not even required on the outreach form.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. Mr. Herman, Mr. Smith. Come on up. Hi there. What items are you speaking on today?
I guess just number 7.
So you have 1 minute.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Adam Smith. Happy to be here. Of course, CD14 needs more homeless housing. Happy to see that. Sometimes I wonder who gets to define what housing is in the city when we're talking about housing for unhoused people. But I did want to bring up, I see that the motion is by anti-black CD14 council member, still not resigned, Kevin De Leon. I see the motion is seconded by council member Blumenfield, who in October said, De Leon remaining on the council would be, and I quote, both a distraction and an impediment, unquote, for the city to move forward. Quote, there is too much at stake, unquote, Blumenfield said, and I quote, I continue to call for their resignations. So I'm just wondering, Councilmember Blumenfield, as you help KDL stay relevant on this council, do you continue to ask for his resignation?
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
So I'm going to speak on all items and non-agenda public comment. So we know already that ex-councilwoman Wendy Gruhl lost to be the mayor, So how good will she be in a homeless service when Wendy's campaign for Englander, escort, and bottle tabs cost us, the taxpayers? Yeah, Goya Bob, I'm on topic. You know it. You know it because you decide to take us off our call-in lines just the other day when you abused Wayne Spindler, for the record.
Sir, she's not on
Item
topic.
3 deals with tobacco and settlements and the funds. Those expenditures and opioid is a cause because you assholes passed Measure 64. Now you can shove it where the sun don't shine. Then item 4 regarding homelessness. Once again, NOD, notice is office discipline. Well, Wendy Gruhl needs a notice. I sure know for a fact she doesn't have kiddie porn, but we have to have notice that the service of authority to prevent homelessness is a bunch of bullshit. And then we go into Kevin DeLyon on item 7. Reappoint Kevin on committees and commission. That is my motion for the floor. He needs to represent the indigenous poor fucking wetbacks like me, Bob, you Goya, because you married a black Goya. No vouchers. Item 5, assistance and prevention. It's all bullshit. That fucking mayor passed some bullshit about spending $12 million to show shit. So what do you got to show, Wendy Gruhl? Show me that you got Trump balls.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, and that is all our speakers for today. So let's move on. Oh, okay. Go ahead.
So, U.S. 395, 444, 1969. Yes, we need to send the Jews back to Israel to figure out
you have to
what
speak
the
on
plan
items.
is on
Sorry.
homelessness.
Sir, you have to speak on items that are under the purview. It still has to be under the purview of the committee.
Can you weigh in on this issue of notice of office discipline? Because you're allowing them to engage in a
Speaker, you need to
bayonets
stay on
by
topic.
threats that I am on topic. I'm talking about Israel having to help
You need to
people
stay on topic
in
within the purview of the
prevention for
Housing and Homelessness
homelessness.
Committee.
It's about homelessness. People living on the streets, people living on the sidewalk, black people, brown people, and all fucking minorities on the fucking street. You fucking retard, asshole,
Sir,
pencil
this-
rubberneck piece of shit, asshole. You, fuck you, 42 U.S.C. 1983.
Thank you.
You need to
And
stay
that
on
is the end
topic.
of public comment today. All right, let's move on to our items. Is Ms. Tanisha Saunders here? No, okay, great. So I'm going to recommend we take item 2, 2, 5, and 7 on consent, if that's fine with everybody, as amended, unless there are any objections. Mr. Verano, can you call the roll on these items?
Councilmember Rahman.
Yes.
Councilmember Blumenfield.
Bloomfield, aye.
Councilmember Harris Dawson. Councilmember Harris Dawson is absent. Councilmember Rodriguez. Yes. Councilmember Lee. These items are approved with number 7 as amended.
Great. So we will start with item 1 briefly because we have Ms. Gruhl here who is being reappointed to the LASA Commission. So if you want to just come to the table. Can you read this item into the record?
Item number 1 is a communication from the mayor relative to the reappointment of Wendy Gruhl to the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority Commission.
Great. And I just wanted to take this opportunity, first of all, to thank you, Wendy, for your work on the commission and for being on it for as long as you have and for continuing to spend your time doing this. I know it's a lot of work. And I just wanted to understand from you, based on some of the changes that we saw at the county in establishing an executive committee on leadership and kind of moving forward with the recommendations from the report on the Blue Ribbon Commission on Homelessness. As you move into this, is it your second or third term?
In the no good deeds unpunished, I'm in the third.
Third
Yes.
term, okay. As you start your third term, how do the changes that are being proposed at the county impact your work on the LASA Commission? How do you imagine that changing your role in any way, or how should we be anticipating our relationship with our commissioners to be changing?
Thank you so much for having me and for the opportunity to be here today. And I think we're seeing, I would say, unprecedented time in which the city and the county are working together, that the engagement of the mayor on literally a daily basis on this issue, and with the hiring of Dr. Valencia Adams-Kellum as our new CEO, that we have seen some dramatic changes and willingness to address some of the issues that I know and have heard from you personally or been reported to me about, challenges on making sure that we are sharing data information, that we are coordinating on outreach, that we are working with the County of Los Angeles to provide the kind of services that are necessary. The adoption the other day was to look at how we can strengthen, I think, the relationship between the city and county more so, and even look at who's appointed to the LASA Commission. As you know, there's 5 members appointed by the mayor, 5 appointed by the county supervisors. Supervisor Horvath was the first in the history to appoint herself, which has actually been a really great addition to this committee and her engagement. She is the chair now of LASA, and to ensure that we have the county at the table too. I think that the executive committee and the role of ensuring that you have the mayor, the leadership of the city council, the county board of supervisors in the same room having those conversations is really important. It's been done informally, and to be able to have that going forward. I know there are some conversations about, are there changes necessary to the JPA or not? I think there's a lot of things that can happen without having to reopen that JPA necessarily, but that will ensure that there is representation on the LASA Commission and others. We have seen with the Inside Safe and the other programs, the master leasing, some of those other issues that are happening, we're changing the way we're doing business and trying to be more responsive. And I credit that a lot to our new CEO and her willingness to kind of get into the weeds, and hiring someone who came from the social service side of it was a really important piece of this, to understand the nuts and bolts as well.
And does the formation of the executive committee change the commission? I mean, how are those two entities related? Or is it a change in the commission itself?
It doesn't change the commission itself. It just ensures that there is a regular meeting and engagement. And I think there's a lot to be determined as we go forward. But that kind of engagement with mayor and board of supervisors at the table together, having those conversations, because as much good intent there is from all levels of government, sometimes right and left don't know what they're doing and the importance of that, and sometimes LASA has played that role. But I think having the elected officials engaged as much as we are seeing now to continue in a more formal basis would be great.
And for me, I think I would make a request of you as you move into this third term, which is, we have historically approved commissioners in this committee, but those commissioners, until their next reappointment, don't come back to the committee. And I would appreciate, as I know you do with me on an individual basis, but would love on a more formal basis through the work of the committee, for you to come back and share with us what you're learning and how we as council members can support the commission in making the changes that we need to LASA. And as you move forward through this third term, I welcome you back here whenever you want, and welcome you telling me when you want to come back and telling us when you want to come back and talk to us.
Anytime, and we can do that on a regular basis and in concert with the CEO. And I have had the opportunity to chat with all 4 of you for one way or now 5 of you, one way or another, when there's been a challenge or an issue, and to try to work those out. And my telephone number hasn't changed, so you can find me there.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the committee members? Sorry, go ahead, Mr. Blumenfield, and then we can.
Great. Mostly I want to thank you. Thank you for your service, your long service on behalf of the city, in many different capacities, but in this capacity, I mean, we need you and someone at LASA to remind LASA that this city is also their client. And I know they know that intellectually, but it's important that sometimes gets overlooked. And to be there to hold, to create accountability, which we haven't had as much. And some of your work has helped us get to this point where we now have some data that we're still seeing how that's going to work out. But I really appreciate you being on this commission and being our city voice. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Wendy, so I'm going to ask you, and I don't expect a lengthy answer, but you indicated that you thought that perhaps without reopening up this the JPA, that there might be opportunities for revisions. You've heard in your tenure and even preceding, you, yes, our former city controller, but certainly in your role as an appointee, the frustrations that have been, been exhausted on this committee, for example, in communicating our frustrations and the lack of transparency forthcoming from LASA. I know with each transition in leadership, I feel like we get set back from where we were, from whatever gains we had achieved in the previous leadership. I thought there were substantial gains, for example, under Heidi. And so I guess given that circumstances, or given that context, my question is, if you believe that there are amendments that could be made that would enable us garnering more of the transparency without having to open up the JPA, what has been the impediment to that happening? What needs to happen and what hasn't happened in order to avail commissioners, or what are we missing that has stopped us from actually getting there without having us belabor the point that we want to open up the JPA because we're tired of not getting answers?
Well, and I think that that I know from, and we have Paul Rubenstein, who's here too from LASA, that not only regular communication on numbers and data, because data has been one of the biggest challenges, and accurate data to make sure that we get it on a timely basis to you all, that we work with both providers and LASA and city and county to make sure that we have the most up to date, but that, data is only as effective as the information that's being put in the system. And so that is part of whether that is requirements in the contracts, whether that is other ways, I think we want to look at that. And we have a new contractor, Gardner, who is going to help in that whole system. I think the other piece has been as well in ensuring that HMIS and the access there and the service provision by some of the council staff, they're working on that as well. I think that transparency and willingness to sit down at the table and be pragmatic about it, it's been such a frustrating issue. I don't need to say this to you, but even as a commissioner, how do you get down to the real nuts and bolts about what's happening on the street and to be able to get people to services? And so I think that there is a commitment by LASA and others with the coordination with mayor and others and you all, which is to get that information to you on a regular basis. And when there's a problem, by the next week, be able to say, here's what we did, here's what we're having a challenge, here's where we need your help. But I think we've come to a point, and this is because of the leadership here, and in that emergency nature, that people are starting to not act as though it's regular business. This is an emergency in which we have to operate very, very differently. And so I think that the close coordination with your office on a number of things had been very helpful in some of the cleanups of encampments, and just making sure that everyone knows what is happening and there's no secrets. And that, to me, is that transparency is very, very important. And I believe that our team understands that, and I know you will tell me if you're not getting what you need as well, and we can see if it is a systematic problem or if it's a one-off, but we want to be able to change that.
Yeah, I think, for us, and I think, to your point, and these are sentiments that I've shared previously about, the data output is only as good as what's put in. We discovered that, I think it was back in 2020 before the homeless count numbers, and we found the errors with it. And so the scrutiny around these numbers, the evaluation, ensuring the integrity of the process is really important. But there's also been a number of service providers that have skirted, they've been playing shell games with accountability, and between our offices and between LASA, depending on where the contracts are held. And so I think to the extent that we can ensure that everyone is being held to the same standard, that the reporting metrics and measures and the loopbacks of data is provided consistently is critical, because I think there's been a lot of games that have been played with, depending upon what the willingness is to share, to the city versus to LASA and the kind of, or to the county if they were funded through DMH or public health. And so there's a lot of, the appearance, or at least the feeling of a lot of not even double dipping, but triple dipping potentially. And we need to make sure that everybody's helping to kind of row in the same space to assure that that we're holding all of these agencies accountable, because there's a lot of money and there's a lot of duplicity sometimes, or or at least there's not a lot of clarity to ensure that there isn't duplicity in the work that's being done.
And the data numbers, and I know they'll talk about even in the prevention, and we were having a conversation with Janie Roundtree yesterday about this, which is, the predictability of some of the numbers and how it helps you develop public policy that's going to be effective. We are dealing with, homeless individuals or families who move, and, you may or may not be perfect in your numbers, but it does tell you something about what your policy should be and how you should go about it. And I think that's the most important part.
Right. Well, thank you for agreeing to take another tour of duty, and we appreciate you.
Thank you. Mr. Lee?
Madam Chair, thank you. I just wanted to thank Scrull for your third term. I think it gives a lot of us great comfort that sit around this horseshoe, knowing that you are there on this commission with your knowledge of the city, and in the past of dealing with you, your thoughtfulness to every issue. Just want to thank you for signing up again. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilman.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Wendy, for coming here today. You've been such an incredible asset to me personally as the chair of this committee, and providing me insight into the system based on your years of knowledge, not just at LASA, but also at the city, for which I've been very grateful. And I look forward to continuing to lean on you for guidance and wisdom and leadership during this time, and look forward to having you back at the committee as we move through, I think, what will be a period of real change and transformation in the months and years ahead. So thank you.
Opportunities, and thank you very much, and please do invite me back. We'll make sure, again, inform you of things where there may be some challenges, and we need your help. And I think that's the spirit that I have sensed this committee and others are really focused in on, and the mayor as well.
Absolutely.
Thank
All
you
right.
so much.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay, do we need to vote on this?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay, great. So let's vote on it.
Councilmember Rahman.
Yes.
Councilmember Blumenfield. Councilmember Harris-Dawson. Councilmember Rodriguez.
Aye.
Councilmember Lee. 5 ayes, and this item is approved.
Great. Congratulations, Ms. Gruhl. Okay, so let's start with item 4 today. We have Janie Roundtree here from the California Policy Lab and John Wickham from the CLA here. If you could both join us at the table, and Mr. Clerk, if you could just read the item into the record.
Item number 4 is a Chief Legislative Analyst report relative to an overview of programs operated by the City, County of Los Angeles, and Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority to prevent homelessness, and recommendations to improve and expand prevention programs and related matters.
Great. We have our visitors at the table. Thank you both so much for coming. And this was delayed. I was hoping to have this completed in 3 sessions, but I know, Ms. Roundtree, you were traveling over the past couple of sessions. And so I think it would be useful for you to present a little bit of your work to the committee, and then we can just step back, discuss the final recommendations, and advance the recommendations from our prevention work to the full council. So with that, I want to give you the floor.
Thank you so much. I really am honored to be here today, and I thank you for your patience that our schedules didn't align and that you were willing to extend the item. I'm Janie Roundtree. I'm the executive director of the California Policy Lab, which is a research center based at UCLA and UC Berkeley. And I'll talk a little bit about our mission. But I just wanted to first recognize the incredible work of the Chief Legislative Analyst's Office in pulling together their report on prevention. It was really comprehensive. My team was reading it yesterday. I think it's a real resource, hopefully for all of you, but also for the public in terms of taking stock on prevention. I did have a few slides, and I assume you each have a copy if they're not projected, which is fine by me. I just wanted to make sure you all have them.
Yes, we should have them.
Okay, great.
And they should actually also be projected as well, so I'm not sure. I don't think you need to wait,
Okay.
but we will get them up on the screen.
Okay, great. So I mentioned that I'm the, you could advance, thank you so much. Mentioned the founding executive director of the California Policy Lab at UCLA. I have a background in government myself. Prior to this, I was the deputy mayor for public safety for the city of Chicago, and prior to that, I was senior counsel for Mayor Michael Bloomberg. And my role in a research center is not accidental. Our mission is to build impactful research partnerships with public agencies in California and bring all of you and the other agencies that we work with real, actionable, rigorous, objective evidence in order to make better decisions and ultimately to improve people's lives, whether it's people experiencing homelessness or on other issues. We have deep working relationships. We don't work on research projects. We establish research relationships that cover many projects over many years. And that includes the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, the City of Los Angeles, both on economic issues and on homelessness, as well as the county across a wide spectrum of issues. And I just say, but I won't talk more about this, but we do work across these 6 policy areas, including education, health, criminal justice reform, homelessness and high needs populations, and safety net programs. And that's not accidental. When we're talking about any of these areas, especially people experiencing homelessness, you have to understand how all of these systems are interacting to create the outcomes that we want to prevent. So a lot of what we're doing behind the scenes is linking data to get much richer and better insights into people's experiences with public systems. And I'll talk about why that's directly relevant to our work on homelessness prevention. So you can advance the slide. So the report that you have mentions that we worked with the CLA staff to set the larger context for homelessness prevention and what we mean by that phrase. So I'm going to talk about it just for a minute here today for all of you. People tend to use that phrase differently or have different meanings, and I think it's helpful to understand sort of the spectrum of types of prevention that's needed and the role that they're playing. And that will help understand or explain what's missing and what needs to be in place, I think, for the city to have a full homelessness prevention strategy. So the first category of types of prevention are what I would call universal or upstream prevention programs. They're critically important, but they tend to reach broader populations. They're anti-poverty programs. I would include here eviction prevention and emergency rental assistance programs, and I'll talk in a minute about why those are not targeted homelessness prevention programs. We think that these are really important. They are in some ways the upstream stopper of the system. So they're very important, but they're not in and of themselves sufficient. The city and the county and LAHSA also need what we would call a targeted prevention program. And a targeted prevention program is designed to help people who would become homeless if they didn't get assistance. And the reason why that's so important and why it's distinct is that there are many people who need eviction assistance or many people who need a rental assistance who are never going to become homeless. The scale of the homelessness crisis is enormous, but it's actually statistically very rare. If you think about 70,000 people roughly at the point in time count, you think about millions of people in the LA area who are on public assistance. Obviously, not everyone who looks like they're at risk of homelessness will experience that outcome. There was a really important survey released this summer by the University of California, San Francisco. I'm sure you're aware of it. It was a massive effort to survey many thousands of people, including here in LA. And I just want to draw out one statistic that only 32% of individuals on the street who were surveyed were in a leaseholder situation prior to becoming homeless. So most people on the street are coming from informal living arrangements where they are not the leaseholder of the property they were there living, or they're coming out of institutional settings, including incarceration. And so that's why these eviction prevention and rental assistance programs are important, but not a complete strategy. You're going to have other strategies to reach people who are on the brink of using your emergency housing system. So targeted prevention, the most difficult thing to do is to actually target these programs. You can't afford to do homelessness prevention for everyone who seems like they might be at risk. You need to be stewards of your public dollars and try to figure out, so who is this group of people who are going to have this extreme outcome if they don't get help? And so our research has really been focused on trying to answer that question for the city and the county and LAHSA. And so I will go to the next slide and talk about two different kinds of solutions for that. So one recommendation that we've made that's included in the report for your consideration is that this system needs a centralized portal or hotline to do this, right? So if you think about the experience people have and the difficult situations that they're in, they might have a financial crisis compounded by a health crisis. We're asking them to do a huge amount of work to find help. They have to know which centers to go to, which programs they're eligible for, how to navigate into the program and get screened into eligibility. And a major recommendation that we have is that to create a hotline or a web portal so that it's easy to find. You need a very clear pathway to be screened into prevention. Once you create that, use rigorous evidence-based criteria for enrolling people in homelessness prevention. And that's where this concept of targeting comes in. Your average income for people who are working prior to become homeless is about $960 a month. And that's for people who are working. These are extremely low income households, right? So you need to set your percentage area median income low enough to make sure you're enrolling the households in greatest needs. And centralizing this process, and I should say something more explicitly, it is decentralized now to the extent that it's happening. It's being run by dozens of different nonprofit organizations. They're sort of lacking in training about how to do this. It's very difficult to navigate. I'm on a case manager listserv where I watch case managers try to help clients navigate into services. I'm just an observer there, but this question comes up all the time. Like, how do I even get my client into a prevention program? So centralizing it solves that problem. It allows you to use rigorous criteria. You can have criteria plus screening tools to see if people are at risk. Things like prior experiences of homelessness can be a major risk factor. The birth of a child or additional family members in your household. There are other ones that I won't talk about today. Typically what you're doing when someone is eligible is giving them one-time cash assistance. And this is really important around the scalability of this approach. There's evidence that that works. And it's supported by statements of people on the street that they experienced a financial crisis that could have been solved with a relatively modest amount of money in that moment. But when they didn't have that safety net, they ended up on the street, and then their problems compound very quickly, and it's much harder for the system to help them at that point. So the idea here is one-time cash assistance, and this program complements the incredible work that CIFD is doing that is much more intensive anti-poverty effort to help households stabilize their finances. There's a role for that program, but there's also a program like this, or a role for this type of program to have an emergency response around homelessness prevention. The last thing I'll say that's specific to the city is that doing this would also allow the city to serve all different household types. A lot of homelessness prevention in the city right now is focused on families. The vast majority of people on the street are unaccompanied adults. And this would help the city, I think, round out its strategy for that really critical population as well. And then the second strategy that we've taken to try to solve the targeting problem, again, that's the question of who would become homeless if they didn't get assistance, is that we're using predictive analytics in a project with LA County Department of Health Services, where the California Policy Lab uses de-identified linked data to predict who is already attached to county health services at its very high risk of either falling into street outreach services or emergency shelter. We've been doing that for several years. We generate risk lists for the county, and they proactively reach out to these people and enroll them in a county homelessness prevention unit. I think about the last time I checked, about half of those clients are City of LA residents, so it's serving the City of LA, even though it's a county administered program. So I'll stop there about that. I'm happy to answer questions about it since it was mentioned in the CLA's report. But I think that if you go to the next slide, the one final point I wanted to say about predictive analytics is that the population served who is self-identifying and calling in for prevention services and the group that we're identifying through predictive analytics are almost not overlapping at all. They are two very distinct groups of people. The predictive analytics group needs to be attached to county health services to even be in the data. The self-identifying group often is not attached to public services yet, so they're not in our data. Also, the type of people who can navigate into the current form of services are often very different than the people we're seeing in the health system who have complex behavioral health, physical health, and other issues, right? So they need someone to reach out to them. They're not the clients who are going to navigate their way through a bureaucratic screening process. So we see these as very complementary. It's not as if because the data science approach sounds scientific that it replaces the other one. They're reaching very different people. And so my last slide is just to say something. I listened to the hearings on this report. If you could just go to the last slide. I listened to your conversations around this report earlier in the summer, and there were a lot of questions. How do we know it's impactful? How do we know if we're getting the results from the investments that we're making? And I would just say that evaluation is critical, and the question you're really asking seeks an impact evaluation, where the goal of the evaluation is to tell you, did this program cause this outcome? And those types of evaluations are more intensive, and they need to be baked into your program design from day one. You cannot do them effectively a year or two into a program rollout. So it's something to think about in terms of adopting the report, so that 2 or 3 years from now, if you're considering, we did this, what happened, that you have really good evidence to support future investments or potentially not doing something if it wasn't as effective as you had hoped. Most evaluations in government are what we call pre-post. It's just asking these, if these clients got these services, what happened to them? That's valuable and important information, and you should continue to do that. But it's not really answering the question that I think you've had, which is, is the money being used efficiently?
Is this preventing homelessness?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you. I'll stop there. I appreciate you having me here today.
Yeah, this is really helpful. I would just say, I think my biggest question was really about I understand that the pool of people identified by the data science work is much larger than the pool of people who are actually reaching out for help. But you're not able to contact a lot of the people that you feel like are the highest at risk of homelessness, right, through the program.
That's right. Anytime you're working with predictive analytics, you're starting with a data set. You can only predict risk among the people that you observe in the data. So in the pilot that's been ongoing for a year and a half, it's people with recent contact with the Department of Health Services or Department of Mental Health. We are reaching those people, and it feels very valuable because it's clear to us that no one else is able to reach these people. And they're very, very vulnerable. They have very high levels of risk, many of whom are days away from becoming homeless and who have a lot of barriers to housing. But that strategy doesn't reach a person who's not in the care of DMH, for example, who's experiencing a rapidly developing financial crisis, who's also at high risk, and who might call a hotline or a web portal and be screened in. So they're very complementary, as I mentioned a few minutes ago.
Okay, got it. Do other committee members have questions? Go ahead, Mr. Blumenfield.
Sure, thank you, and I really appreciate this report. I'm curious about, and by the way, I found it's pretty shocking, your page 5, to have almost no overlap between our prevention and predictive analytics. That's a big spotlight for us. I'm curious, though, in your research, if you found homeless prevention programs are more effective when they're run by cities or when we contract out to service providers. Do you have any insight into that?
They are frequently contracted out to service providers who have the capacity to run the check writing process and who can quickly staff up to deliver the services. The hotline in Chicago is run by Catholic Charities, which has a large footprint in the Midwest. There's a nonprofit, I believe, running the one in San Diego, and a well-regarded nonprofit called All Home running the one in the Bay Area. That said, Los Angeles is very unique, and I think the city, LAHSA, and the county really have to make a decision here, what would work best here.
Yeah, we have our home source centers and other ways to do it, but I'm just curious because we're struggling with how to do these programs and the best place to administer them, and so any insights into that would be helpful for us. So thank you.
Other questions? Go ahead.
Thank you so much. So at some point, I was reminded by my staff, we were talking about in previous iterations of this committee, evaluation of the service providers and the efficacy of the service providers, which ones have, in terms of assessing their ability to properly service, who has greater fallout rates. What has been the circumstances in terms of perhaps still monitoring or measuring the outcomes associated with the work of those that are contracted to engage in this level of case management, support services, and the like?
Is the question how, if this is contracted to a service provider, how that service provider's performance
Correct.
could be
Are
evaluated?
you measuring the performance? Is there any analytics or just kind of evaluation? Because they're not all the same.
Right.
Some we see individuals falling out of their programs, or they're a revolving door. Others, and I think that's important. Those are important metrics, because whether a LASA or an LA County DMH or public health or city council office
Right.
decides that they're going to contract, how do you know you're contracting with a good service provider versus one that is just cashing the check and not delivering on service?
Right. Yeah. It's such an important question, and I'm going to give you a slightly two-part answer. So if the city were to select a service provider to run a new prevention program, I would recommend you build such an evaluation in from day one, so the provider knows that they are being evaluated and on what terms, and that a data collection plan is in place, because a lot of times the data is the barrier to really understanding performance, whether it's the provider or other aspects of the system. And I think that's
or an
worked.
office.
Yeah, I think that's worked well. I'll just say sort of more generally, having worked in Los Angeles on evaluations of programs that are run by the service providers here in LA, there is a systematic state, federal, and to some extent local disinvestment in the workforce of our service providers. A lot of them are working with minimum wage workers. They don't have the general operating reserve to absorb a lot of the policy changes that are occurring. And this was really clear in our evaluation of retention and permanent supportive housing, and the fact that Black residents were much more likely to fall out of homelessness. They're being placed into housing units structurally that have fewer supports. They have fewer caseworkers. The caseworker turnover is higher. The caseworkers didn't have a career path, right? So I've worked in government.
We also saw that with Project Roomkey, for example, where
Right.
we were standing all of these locations up, and you had 20-year-olds pointing to where the Narcan was, right?
Right.
So
yeah.
there's different levels of professionalization or lack thereof
Right.
In the service providers, depending on what the circumstances are. It's for that reason that I asked this question, and so I appreciate your answer in that. I think as a policy-making body, we need to be really thoughtful about how we, and this goes to, and I know the CAOs here and everybody that when we engage in contracting, is what are the report backs, what are the loops, what are the expectations that we're setting for those report backs, so that we can assure the outcomes.
Right.
And to the question that I asked Ms. Gruhl, previously, it's how are we assuring that we're actually getting what we're paying for?
Right.
And it varies from service provider to service provider.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Great. If there are no other questions, I want to just move to considering the item more broadly. We've heard multiple presentations on the issue of homelessness prevention from people who are involved in this work across the city departments, from the CLA that did an overview of all of that work, from LASA, and from county partners who are also involved in this work, either directly or, as you said in your report, Ms. Roundtree, in a upstream prevention fashion. I think that what the CLA report revealed to me, and I think something that has been really underscored by the fact that we've been trying to utilize new data that the city has about who is actually receiving eviction notices, to be more proactive around getting those individuals the resources that they need. I have seen that there is quite a bit of daylight between the kind of prevention centralization that the report is recommending and what is out there in the city today. And I think the report did a good job of laying that out. I was wondering for the committee, would you tell us what it means to adopt these recommendations today? How would that change what's happening at the city? What would be put in motion as a result of us taking this action? And I think there's a couple of small amendments. And what can you share about what would feel like a good sequencing or timeline for you as a next step coming out of this?
Yes, so John Wickham with the Office of the Chief Legislative Analyst. And first off, I'd like to note that Pranita Matia was the primary author of the report, and she's here with me today. So she'll remind me if I'm missing something. Exactly as you point out, there is no coordination across the various departments in the city in doing this prevention work. I think the work that Janie in the California Policy Lab has done is actually starting to bring together almost a national conversation on prevention and finding ways to put that at the front of the line in how we help prevent homelessness to begin with, how we are dealing with people to keep stability in their lives, in their housing. And so starting this conversation now means that we're seeing, as you're saying, the daylight between what's happening and where we want to go. So the recommendations in our report, after having spoken to city departments, the county, the California Policy Lab, everybody was identifying the same thing. We need a central location where people can reach out and find and be navigated through this crazy system that we have with so many different places and so many different types of assistance that might be available that they just can't find. And so one of our key recommendations is to begin that conversation to bring all of these voices, all of these agencies and voices together so we can work to identify that single entry point into the system to allow the navigation. And that's across the county and the city, but also within the city, because we have the Housing Department, Department of Aging, CIFD, the new Youth Department, who are all doing their own programs, and there are ways that they interact and overlap in this particular question. And so we need to find a way to bring them together. We don't want to have overlapping programs. We don't want to have overlapping services. We want that to be streamlined and efficient. But we need to figure out how to do that effectively.
Right.
And so our recommendations get to this point of identifying leads to do this work, and initiating the conversations and having the council instruct the departments to do this work as a priority.
Right. And I think the key missing piece for me in the recommendations coming out of it was that I think we need to centralize how people access this system, but also within our city, centralize a conversation around how we manage the system. To Ms. Rodriguez's point, how we evaluate the system and its effectiveness, and how we gather data from that system, how we ensure that there is no overlap or duplication of resources, that we're not doing outreach to the same neighborhoods or to the same people over and over again from different departments, and how we maximize every dollar that we're spending on these issues. And so I'm really hopeful about next steps here, and I'm excited that we will be kind of bringing this together around around this central question of homelessness prevention, both upstream and targeted, and really centering our work around this question and evaluating it that way. Any other questions from other committee members before we move this item forward? Okay, great. So let's vote on this item as amended.
Councilmember Rahman.
Yes.
Councilmember Blumenfield. Aye. Councilmember Harris-Dawson. Aye. Councilmember Rodriguez. Aye. Councilmember Lee. 5 ayes, and this item is approved as amended.
Thank you, Ms. Roundtree, for being here. Thank you, Mr. Wickham. Thank you, Ms. Amatia. This was a really good report, a really substantial report, which for me really helped me to understand a lot more about the city. So thank you all. Next, let's move to item 8, which is a verbal update from the CAO and the city attorney. Mr. Verano, can you please read this item into the record?
Item number 8 is a verbal update from the City Administrative Officer and the City Attorney relative to the status of current and future memorandum of understandings involving the City and County of Los Angeles and the settlement agreement between the city and the LA Alliance and the city's progress toward meeting its obligations pertaining to these MOUs and agreements and related matters.
So I wanted to bring this to this committee in part because I think it's been a long time since we've talked about the Alliance settlement. It was a big topic of discussion. It continues to shape a lot of our work and investments in the city. And I think it's important to discuss it in the context of what's happened. In June of 2020, the city reached an agreement with the county to create 6,700 new homeless housing units within 18 months to address the COVID emergency. This is what I understand. This agreement is the roadmap agreement, and we continue to monitor progress on the roadmap agreement and set targets including 700 beds in existing agreements with the county and 5,300 new beds within 10 months and 700 additional beds within 18 months. The city then, as of March of 2023, we have basically met most of the goals of this agreement, right? And in April of 2022, the city and the Alliance came to an additional agreement, which I hope that you'll share more details about today, which would require opening enough beds over the next 5 years to accommodate at least 60% of the city's unsheltered population broken down by each council district. And the county, as far as I know, is not part of the settlement, but I'm not sure where we are in actually executing this settlement, what were the other agreements with the county on this issue, and what this agreement actually dictates about permanent versus interim housing units and the progress that we're making on all of this, and how we're making budgetary allocations as we plan year on year towards meeting the goals that are outlined in this settlement and how binding those are on our city's actions. I think this is really particularly important to consider in the context of our investments in Inside Safe and the work that we've been doing through the mayor's office, led by the mayor's office, on bringing those beds online. How do those engage with our commitments under the Alliance settlement? How do we think about our total budgetary investments on these issues between these two different commitments that we're making, and how can we maximize our resources on all of these? So with that, I want to turn the floor over to you, Mr. Szabo, and Mr. Marcus, and if you want to just kind of lay out an update for us, I think that'll be very useful for this committee.
Sure. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Matt Szabo, City Administrative Officer. So as you laid out in the opening, there is a lot. There's the roadmap agreement, there's the Alliance settlement and the obligations that we're working towards on that, and then there is a pending agreement with the County of Los Angeles. So I'll go through I'll go through principally the requirements of the Alliance settlement, give you an update as to where we are on that, and then review the pending agreement with the county and an update as to where we are on that. So first and foremost, as it relates to our obligations, as you said, we entered into a settlement on the Alliance matter. The agreement is a 5-year term beginning on June 14th, 2022, excuse me, through June 13th, 2027. The principal requirement in that agreement is that the city build 12,915 beds, and I should say not just build but establish, provide 12,915 new beds. That number and the requirement in the settlement is a citywide number. The settlement does contemplate a council district by council district standard, but it is not a requirement. The actual requirement for the beds is a citywide requirement. Mm-hmm. The city has sole discretion to determine the type of intervention. It could be interim, it could be permanent housing, anything between a safe sleep or even a reunification, all the way to permanent supportive housing that's fully serviced. In terms of our progress to date, as I said, the required number over the 5-year term is 12,915. As of the end of June, there are 7,954 beds beds or units that are either open or in progress. Of that, 1,748 are open. That includes 143 interim units, 1,605 permanent supportive housing units. That comes from...
what was the PSH number?
The PSH number is 1,605 units that are open as of the end of June. And that breaks down to 1,250 HHH units, 97 non-HHH units that are from the Housing Department's pipeline, and 258 Project Home Key units.
258.
258 Project Home Key units, correct. There are also, so for example, of the units that we are counting as open, occupiable, and in compliance with or towards our required number for the Alliance settlement, we are counting Highland Gardens, 143 beds that we're in a long-term lease for. We're counting Summit View Apartments, 48 units that just recently opened. We're counting the Brynhurst development, 40 units. That was a Home Key 2 project. So those are examples of projects that we are counting towards our requirement for the Alliance settlement. We also have 6,206 beds that are in the pipeline, that are in the process of being established. That is also from, those are all permanent units. It is primarily from HHH, so we will have over the next 4.5 years 3,734 prop HHH units that will open. We are counting 995 Home Key Round 2 units and an additional 300 Home Key Round 3 units. And then on top of that, 1,177 non-HHH permanent supportive housing units. So where does that leave us? That leaves us with 4,961 beds that would need to be established over the 5-year term, for which we do not currently have plans for. They are not in the pipeline. And to your question, how would we get there? And before I do that, I want to point out the rooms. What I just went over doesn't describe the entire universe of interventions that we're funding. But there are interventions that we are funding that we are not counting, or that would not count based on the terms of the settlement. So number one, it's any units that opened prior to June 14th, 2022, and any units that we are counting to meet the obligation of the roadmap units, the interim agreement that we made as a result of Judge Carter's order on the freeway encampments. So any of the units that we're counting towards that are part of that 6,700 would not count towards Alliance. Anything prior to June 14th, 2022. We are also not counting any of the short-term motel rooms related to Inside Safe.
Or any short-term motel rooms, right?
We're not counting any short-term motel rooms, correct? Anything that is inherently short-term, we would prefer not to count, although we technically could. The standard would be they need to be open in June of 2027. And the idea, we would certainly hope that we wouldn't be having the same hotel rooms still open and still being used.
So anything that's not open in 2027 would not count towards this. So any of the short-term motel rooms wouldn't count. Would like a rapid rehousing voucher or Would those count towards this goal?
Rapid rehousing would count as long as it is being funded
Out of this.
and we can establish that it is being used and it is, if not occupied, if it's not being used, at least available to be used on that June 2027 date.
Okay. That's
Clarification?
Yeah, go ahead.
You're talking about the short term, but we're counting cabin communities or tiny homes, which are short term.
So currently we're counting most of the tiny home villages, and we're currently not counting any of the tiny home villages towards our alliance settlement.
You're not?
We are not.
Okay.
We're counting, we're using the tiny home villages to meet our roadmap requirement, which we...
because of the timing.
Because of the timing, and many of them we established, many of them, not all, but many we established prior to June of 22. And if they were to not continue past 3 years, 4 years, we wouldn't want to count those because they would need to be open by, they would need to still be open by June of 2027.
Got it.
But the bridge homes we do count?
Bridge homes would count towards the roadmap, not towards the alliance. And again, mostly because the bridge homes were open.
Because they had to have opened
Before.
after June 2022.
Yes.
So
Okay.
anything that's newly opened would count. But
Right. That was very important. It was very important to the judge that made us commit, who made us commit multiple times that this agreement is for new housing.
Right.
We wouldn't go back and say, well, we've done all this and we're going to count this as new.
And can you talk about the agreement with the county that is part of the new agreement, or that is potentially part of the new agreement? This is where I have. Go
Sure.
ahead. Yeah.
So in September, so this agreement was made and the effective date was June of 2022 to settle the alliance matter. After that, we engaged the county to try to secure an agreement that would support these units that we were required to build, principally in the area of outreach and providing services.
At the interim housing sites.
At the interim housing sites and at the permanent sites.
And at the permanent sites, got it.
Correct. So we reached an agreement in September of 2022. That agreement is in the form of a term sheet currently that is intended to be drafted into an MOU that would then be brought to this council and the Board of Supervisors for approval. The agreement, the term sheet calls for a similar 5-year term. The term would be the same term as our alliance settlement. So it would go back, and the obligations that the county would have would go back to June of 2022. And we insisted on that because we anticipated there may be delays because the county had their own settlement discussions with the plaintiffs, and we didn't want our agreement to be held up, or at least we would want the opportunity to recoup what we otherwise would have been owed pursuant to the agreement. And principally, there are a number of items in the agreement, but principally the agreement requires the county to increase the number of multidisciplinary teams to 34 and to dedicate those teams exclusively to the City of Los Angeles, and to provide a minimum of at least one team per council district.
And how many teams are there now?
There are currently 22 teams.
Okay.
There are currently 22 teams, but those teams are also not
countywide.
Exclusive. They're correct. They're not exclusive to the city. The agreement also requires the county increase the number of homeless outreach and mobile engagement teams, the home teams that are focused on more serious mental illness situations, and that would increase from 5.5 teams that they estimate they dedicate to the City of Los Angeles, and those would be dedicated exclusively to the city. And as it relates to services, the county did agree to cover services for any of the units that we established in compliance with our alliance settlement, permanent or interim, over the term of the agreement, and that would be both the daily bed rate that that you see in the reports and our HAP reports that we're covering the daily bed rate for the services for the service providers and mainstream services, DMH, DPH, public social services that they would provide to the residents of the interim and permanent housing.
So just to underscore that, this agreement that we still haven't signed with the county would ensure that they are actually paying for all of the services at interim and permanent sites that are developed for this agreement, up to $12,915. But that agreement is not currently in place, so the city is paying for the services at the sites that we've established and opened so far.
That is correct. The agreement, the term sheet has been agreed to and signed. It has not been effectuated through a memorandum of understanding. So it will still need to go through the council for approval. It would need to be approved by the Board of Supervisors. And actually the agreement, there is a little bit of leeway in there, a little bit of give. So it would be up to 13,300 units.
And why has it taken a long time for the MOU to be approved by the council? Like what is required in order for us to approve this MOU?
So I would say we are in the attorneys have been drafting, and we have been in discussions about how best to move that forward. But I do have assurance from my counterpart in the county that they're prepared to move forward.
They're what?
That they are prepared to move forward with the agreement, whether or not they're moving forward with the settlement. And I think, I don't want to again speculate as to reasons for delay, but the content of the city-county term sheet, that the content was also the basis over which they attempted to settle their case with the plaintiffs. They brought that to the judge. The judge did not approve it, and so that it was, to use a legal term, it was in limbo for a period of time.
Okay.
And so, but I do have confirmation that they're prepared to move forward with an agreement with the city, separate and apart from whether the matters are resolved. Although we should probably be talking about this in not an open session, but yes.
Got it. Okay. But so the other question I have is just for the implications for any discussions that we're having around, we're talking about acquisition of the Mayfair later, we're talking about, I think it's just useful for this committee to understand the implications of renting motel rooms night by night versus acquisition under the context of this agreement, which is, I'm just trying to understand what would it mean for us and for our balance sheet as we think through potential investments in master leasing, long-term leases, hopefully the interim housing RFP that we're going to be seeing in a couple of months, versus paying for hotel rooms night by night, and how does that impact how we spend money on homelessness and services in the city, provided that this agreement is signed shortly.
Well, if the measure, and the question is if we're going to be spending money on interventions, and the intention is to spend money on interventions that will forward or advance our compliance with the alliance requirement, then certainly permanent housing, permanent interim housing, or long-term leases is far preferable, and it would count towards our required number over motel rooms.
And if we do invest in long-term interventions, the services cost based on this agreement will actually be paid by the county as opposed to the city at these sites, right?
If the term sheet is effectuated and approved by both bodies in an MOU, then yes.
Okay, and then just one last question before I throw it up into the committee. Tell us about the plan for the remaining 1/3 of the beds for which we don't currently have a plan. What is the, based on what we've spent already on this 6,700 initial beds, how much more money are we looking to commit over the period of this settlement for this 1/3 beds, and where do you anticipate the funding and those beds coming from?
So as it relates to the remainder of the obligation in the 4961, where we would look, and there has not been a plan identifying 4,961 beds presented to you. And as we've said, it would be additional permanent interim, or long-term leases. What we would look at, and what we would look at counting towards that obligation. So we're going to have a conversation about Mayfair. If we move forward with Mayfair, those 294 units would count towards the obligation. The budget contemplates an additional $47 million that is part of the homelessness emergency account that was identified by the mayor's office to be dedicated towards acquisition. If any motels that we acquire that we would own long term, those would count towards the requirement. And then, of course, we have begun the process of spending ULA. If the issues around ULA are resolved and we're able to access the full amount of funding, then any units that are acquired or constructed and then financed to be permanent supportive housing, we would count towards that requirement. So we would look to those funds to fund the acquisition for additional permanent units.
And so at this moment, there is no plan, but you feel like we have the makings of a plan for the remainder third of these beds?
Yes, there are opportunities, correct.
Okay, and then just want to reiterate that question that I asked in there, which is based on the amount that we've spent on fulfilling 2/3 of the commitment that we have a clear plan for. What is the remainder outstanding funding for the 1/3 that's left? Just an estimate.
I couldn't give you an estimate. It would entirely depend on
the kind of investment.
It entirely depend on the type of investment and whether it's and how much the city would be contributing. For example, on Home Key, we're contributing half the cost of each unit, more or less. Mm-hmm. We would potentially be, I couldn't speculate. It depends on what would be required to establish each unit.
Okay, well, I have other questions, but I want to go ahead.
So, to be clear, you indicated that the...
Microphone. Can't hear.
Am I on? Okay. So to be clear, you indicated that none of the efforts with Inside Safe are qualifying under the agreement in terms of our fulfillment of our Alliance settlement case.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I mean, I would say
okay, so what number of the units that have currently been secured under all the fulfillment and the expenditures associated with Inside Safe, how much of that has gone into fulfilling the compliance and agreement that we currently have with the Alliance case?
To date, and thank you for that clarification, to date, none of the units related to Inside Safe are
so
being
we've spent whatever we've spent. It hasn't helped to fulfill our obligation with the settlement agreement that we secured.
Correct.
Okay, so thank you for that, because that's, again, we've gone into an agreement. We said that we were going to be fulfilling an obligation so that we could be coming to compliance. With failure to be in compliance is a problem when we go enter any settlement agreement, correct? Generally, as an attorney, Scott, we don't want to do that, right? Okay, just checking. I just wanted to make sure the rules haven't changed. So I guess my other part of the question is, So given that we've expended all these resources, the other piece of it is when, because one of the items that we haven't discussed is, for example, the allocation of the opioid settlement money and the obligation of the county, for example, to fulfill, the service provisions under the agreement, for which we still don't have an MOU signed, but this commitment to fulfill it. Is there an expectation that at some point they will, there will be restitution, that at some point anything that we've expended in providing support in these for these units that we've already provided under this tentative agreement that we have, or understanding that we have with the county, that at some point we're going to have some recoverability of the resources that we've expended?
That was contemplated in the agreement, yes. There's a provision that establishes that the county's obligation and the city's obligation under the agreement would commence on June 14th, 2022. So the county's obligation to cover the services and that would begin on June 14th, 2022. So yes, there would be an expectation that we would work out with them the appropriate amount for
to recover the funds that we've expended. Correct. For the services.
Yes.
And so when you indicated you kind of prefaced, because my understanding in terms of the term sheet, and I don't have it in front of me in terms of the Alliance case, my question is, what is the determinant factor of not qualifying any of the any of the inside safe efforts as part of satisfying the settlement agreement? Because the way you framed it was, we've chosen not to, and so my question is what was the determinant factor of choosing not to?
The likelihood that those units would be open, occupiable in June of 2027. So if we're identifying a unit in a motel, if we have not acquired that motel, or if we're not if we have not entered into some long-term agreement that would give us reasonable assurance that that motel room will be available to the city and available to PEH in the city by June or through June of 2027, we are not recommending that it be counted. Could we count it? Yes, we don't recommend it, and we haven't submitted as such to the court.
So I guess my question is that potentially, though, given our I understand that we're choosing not to, but my question is, there's nothing that precludes us from doing so, because the potential exists. I guess my question is that if we're not prepared, or if we don't have a longer term plan, then we're basically burning this money, right? We've already ascertained in previous presentations that, for example, we're still even unclear whether or not the units that we are in fact paying for are fully being maximized in terms of its use. So that in itself is already problematic. But then to continue with that thinking, that we're not even using it as an opportunity to satisfy our obligation to fulfill the compliance that we have, that's also further kind of causing potential problems for us in liability. So I'm trying to understand, because we're talking about a substantial amount of money, and we're talking about these placements, whether again, I understand we don't have the permanent agreement, but if the goal isn't to fulfill this obligation, then what the hell are we spending this money for?
Well, I certainly don't want to speak for the mayor's office, but I have been in this committee when they have indicated that their goal for the Inside Safe program is to move from a heavy investment in short-term motels to acquiring and establishing more permanent interim housing that can be used for the effort. That is a transition to more permanent interim housing as opposed to motel rooms is certainly something that the CAO's office would support, both for reasons that we would then be able to count it towards our requirement, and it would be certainly more cost effective.
Right. Well, the other part of it too is, again, with every delay or lack of fulfillment of the obligation that the county fails to provide in terms of the service provisions that they're required to do as part of the agreement that we've settled with them, and there's obviously a potential for more. But I guess given that circumstance, what we're also doing is not dealing with the high acuity needs, you know, to ensure the success of even the operations that we currently have, even if on an interim basis. Correct? We've heard the stories. So I guess, you know, I'm asking these questions, obviously knowing much of what the answers already are, but it presents a substantial problem, I think, for both for the success of the operations long term, from a fiduciary perspective and the fiscal perspective, what we're spending and what we're getting for it, and we're still falling short of being able to count those beds. Because I know where, absent certain areas, stepping up and fulfilling, the reason why there was an exercise in even providing the option for a council district by council district fulfillment was because there were council districts that were doing their parts, and there were those that were thumbing their nose at any obligation to fulfill. So, I understand all of that, but yeah, I think, it's concerning that we continue to expend this substantial amount of resources and still not, haven't signed MOU, that I think potentially we could be landing, hopefully, something substantially more than what we've already got, but certainly not even electing the opportunity for us to count the units that we're onlining right now for fulfillment of this settlement agreement, I think is really problematic, because we've done all this work. We know we're the city of Los Angeles, we're gonna produce the units. We're gonna, I think, exceed. I think the expectation is that we will exceed the number of units that are even potentially required. I think we're gonna continue to do it. We're gonna perform. We performed even with these initial litmus tests of whether or not we would be able to perform. And so, given that we hit those thresholds, it's based on the MOU that the county is actually going to even be giving us those bonus thresholds of resources that was committed as well. Weren't there like interim chunks of money that we were supposed to get, like bonus levels, if you will?
So that's, I think you're referring to the
roadmaps.
The roadmap agreement, and the roadmap agreement requires us to have established open and occupiable 6,700 units through 2025. And if we have those units open, and we did meet that requirement, as the chair mentioned, within the required 18 months, we did hit that number, and annually for the term of the roadmap agreement, the county provides the city $60 million to offset the cost of the services that we are providing at those interim units.
So based on that, on the roadmaps, so we're eligible for that, irrespective of whether or not we have a signed MOU?
Correct, yes. That is a separate and prior agreement, yes.
Okay, and so that we are in receipt of, or?
We are. We've received the $60 million every year, and that amount is, does it fully fund the services? No, it's an amount estimated at about half of the daily bed rate. In some cases, less than half. It doesn't cover everything.
And it still doesn't cover services.
It covers the services provided by the daily bed rate. So when we contract with a provider,
and the
we
case
pay them
management
to run
and the
the
service
facility.
provider.
Correct. Okay. We use that $60 million to cover the services, to help cover the services for ABH, the tiny home villages, etc.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I know we're short on time, so I'm not going to ask a lot of questions, but in terms of the agreement between the city and the county, when can we expect that? Or let me ask, can we get that back before the council within a couple of weeks so we can get that going, because timing is really critical?
If that's the council's direction, I think I certainly talk to our counterparts, and I think we can report back with something in a short period of time.
Great. And I'm not sure if we can do that as a formal action. This is a report only, but since it's just a report back, I think, can we make that into a formal motion?
Yeah, I'd second that if we can.
Well, we cannot on the discussion
We cannot.
item. Correct.
Okay, we're going to make that as a request.
Yeah, so it's just, consider that a informal, formal request from this committee.
Okay.
We can do it as a separate motion if we need to, but certainly my desire that we get that going.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the committee for engaging so closely on this question. Thank you to the both of you for coming and answering questions. I just want to underscore what I feel like for me are my key takeaways. One, a real urgency to make sure that we're getting our agreement with the county signed so that we can get support on paying for services at all of our sites, at all of the beds that we're putting together for this settlement. And I think a real desire on my part to ensure that all of the investments that we're making going forward that are addressing homelessness are also bringing us towards this goal of meeting our goals for the judge and for this agreement, and ensuring that we can get the most out of our dollars. I think in the past there has been a broader agreement that the city pays for space, creates shelter beds, builds housing, and that the county pays for services. And now in some of our interventions we're doing both, and we shouldn't have to. I think that we can work in really good partnership with the county to ensure that we're all working towards meeting our goals while using our scarce resources, our scarce city resources, to build as many beds as possible, and to find as much housing and to establish as much housing as possible so that we can move as quickly as possible towards these goals. So I'm eager to move towards that, and eager to work with you both in doing that, and request your support in advising us as we're making our investments going forward towards investments that satisfy both of our goals here, which is both meeting the goals of the settlement and addressing more broadly homelessness and issues facing the city. So thank you both for your time today. Thank you to the committee for your engagement. And I think we don't have any action to take on this item, right?
That's correct, Madam Chair.
Okay, given the timing, thank you again. I think we're going to continue all other items on this agenda, adjourn this meeting, and move into our special meeting.